All right, now we're joined by Jonathan Emord, who is really, I believe, one of the most important voices in our republic. He has defeated the FDA in court. He has written numerous books, some of which are on my top list of most important books. He has a new book coming out now that's called Restore the Republic. Well, Jonathan, it's great to have you on. I'm honored to have you as a guest today. Thank you for your contributions, and I'm really excited about your new book.
We Restore the Republic, unfortunately for the nation, the entire rights basis of this country, all of the power-limiting doctrines that are imposed on the federal government by the Founding Fathers have been stripped from the Constitution for the past 75 years, beginning primarily during the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s. The government has consistently violated the constitutional limitations on power, so much so that it has transformed the United States from a limited federal republic into an unlimited bureaucratic oligarchy. 9/10 of all federal law is now the product of those who are not elected, who run the independent regulatory commissions. And the effect of this is profound in reducing protection for individual liberty.
But some specific examples of that, Jonathan, could you go into those? For example, the ATF telling gun shops that they have to report more than one sale of a rifle to somebody on the same day. Congress never passed that law. The ATF simply invented that. The FDA invents things. Can you give other examples of these
Sure.
oligarchies just inventing their own rules?
Well, there are no procedural checks whatsoever in any of the federal agencies to cause agency officials to second-guess their actions based on restrictions in the Constitution. So, for example, the government will give itself the authority to engage in these inspections through the ATF, for example. But the ATF agents and the ATF itself have no procedural checks to prevent them from infringing upon individuals' rights. They just don't exist in the government. And the reason for it, even though they exist in the Constitution, is that the government is a renegade. It has left the Constitution. There's a dissonance between what the Constitution requires and what the government is doing that is so great that we no longer have a nation of free people and a nation that protects our individual liberty, even though at the founding of the Republic, of course, that was the central purpose for having a government at all. It was to protect the rights of man, the unalienable rights of individuals. And in the book, Restore the Republic, I not only chronicle this history and precisely how each one of the doctrines the Founding Fathers identified as essential to limiting power and ensuring freedom have been destroyed, but also how we can recreate those doctrines and re-implement them, and specifically what reductions in government, specific agencies and departments that should be eliminated in order for us to save the nation from destruction. I mean, we are literally within a decade of the destruction of the United States.
Wait a minute. Let me stop you right there. Those are strong words. You also use the term renegade government, but I think people are seeing that what you were saying is true. You just said we're within a decade of maybe losing the republic we have. People are seeing that the federal government is increasingly lawless. It does not even honor the laws of the land, certainly not the Constitution, certainly not the Bill of Rights. Can you comment on that?
Well, the government violates rights with impunity. Take, for example, the National Defense Authorization Act completely suspends the writ of habeas corpus so that any American accused of having support for a terrorist organization, whether they're rightly accused or wrongly accused, we don't know until there's a trial, but we're certainly entitled to a presumption of innocence. That is all blown away because military forces may go and apprehend you and put you in jail and do so indefinitely without ever bringing you before a court of justice, without ever even informing you of their charges. And that just came into law through the National Defense Authorization Act. We have reached a state in this country where rights are violated with impunity to pursue federal objectives. I mean, the Obamacare, for example, the insurance mandate, we're violating individuals' rights to privacy, to freedom of contract, to freedom of association with impunity with Obamacare. Everyone must be insured. You must go out and buy insurance from a private insurer that is qualified by the federal government come January 1, 2014. And that's a gross deprivation of your freedom of choice, your individual liberty. It's antithetical to the very core values of the Constitution and to express rights that are protected by the Constitution.
I do want to get to some solutions. I know your book offers solutions, and I want to ask you about that. But to support what you're saying about the seriousness of this issue, you know, I've got a lot of friends, people, contacts in the military. There is talk in the military that, you know, they will refuse orders to confiscate guns. There's even talk in some quarters of, if things continue going down this road where we're losing the republic, talk of a military coup to restore law and order under the Constitution and under the Bill of Rights. I mean, that's, you don't hear that publicly, obviously, but just, you know, behind closed doors, that talk is very real. It is happening. Do you think that's an indication of how far down this road of tyranny we have already gone and found ourselves?
Well, there's no more fundamental rule of law than the Constitution. And when you amend the Constitution without following the process identified in Article 6 of the Constitution, which is to obtain the consent of the American people to an amendment, when you don't do that, and when you instead just alter the Constitution by making specific provisions dead letters, by reinterpreting provisions to mean the opposite of what they were intended to mean, when you do those sorts of things, you erode and destroy the legitimacy of the government, and you invariably invite the very kinds of revolutions that the Founding Fathers feared would be necessary. I mean, Thomas Jefferson was the most strident advocate of revolution. He said that if the United States didn't have a revolution every 20 years, he would be fearful for the defense of liberty, because he invariably thought that governors would rule corruptly, that they would pursue their own self-interest at public expense and would deny people their rights. And Adams and Alexander Hamilton believed that the electoral process would be sufficient. Well, now we're very much testing that. I mean, either the government of the United States will come into
30 seconds,
conformity.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Either the government of the United States will conform with the Constitution, or it will provoke a reaction from the American people, the likes of which we have not seen.
All right, very important words from Jonathan Emord, author of the new book, Restore the Republic. We'll be back with more interview with Jonathan Emord on the other side of this break. We're continuing our interview with Jonathan Emord, author of Restore the Republic, and just before the break, he was talking about the breakdown of the republic and how these federal agencies are growing out of control, becoming lawless, renegade agencies. Where do you want to pick it up, Jonathan, from there?
Well, both Republicans and Democrats who are economists, Alice Rivlin, for example, from the Clinton administration, and Dan Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, agree that federal spending at the present levels is unsustainable. The government simply cannot exist if we are to maintain these spending levels. We have a $15.5 trillion national debt. That's to rise to about $23 trillion by 2021. The interest on the debt alone by 2021 will be over $700 billion a year. When you look at the present levels of spending, they exceed the national debt exceeds the gross domestic product, and the trajectory for future spending is to cause that division to even grow wider. So it's impossible to sustain this government. And the politics of spending are still very much alive. Government politicians have absolutely no hesitation to offer more and more extraordinarily expensive spending programs, and no serious effort whatsoever to reduce the cost of the government or the size and the scope of it. And everything that is private is invariably becoming either public or subject to heavy government regulation and control, stultifying the growth of the marketplace. So at the same time that the government very much needs more revenue in order to finance this vast expansion of the government that seems endless, it is destroying the very source of its revenue.
You just said to make everything private public. Exactly. Government controlling the economy. What about the destruction of the economy, the destruction of the private sector, the destruction of innovation, the shifting of jobs forcefully outside the country? Do you think that's deliberate, or is it just really poor planning by people in Washington?
No, of course it's deliberate. These people have spent decades in social engineering. I mean, and in economic planning. They have spent lifetimes, these bureaucrats have spent lifetimes involved in precisely this kind of expansion of the regulatory state.
Places like LA, places like New York, Chicago, these cities are in so much trouble, and we as a nation are in so much trouble if things start to fall apart. I mean, there's no place to grow food in these cities. There's no way to get water. There's no way to be safe. There's probably not going to be any law or order in a breakdown, even like a grid down scenario. But Jonathan Emord, our guest, continues with us now to talk about what looks like what could be the failing of the republic if we stay on this current path. And then how can we stop that from happening? How can we put us on a new course to restoring the republic and saving America? Because America is a great country. There's so much going for it. We've got to defend it. We've got to keep it, get it back on track and stop these tyrants in Washington from stealing our future. Jonathan, go ahead and continue the point you left off on before the break, or you can start a new point.
Well, yes, you know, the irony of all this is that the government is going to be reduced in its size and scope and cost by force or by volitionally through changes that are brought about as a result of willingness to accept the reforms that are necessary. So either the government will do this volitionally or it will happen inevitably, because the government simply can't sustain itself at present levels indefinitely. Cannot happen. And in fact, it's likely to cause a reduction, dissolution of the government within a decade.
What does that look like if the government doesn't rein itself in and it blows through the realistic boundaries of spending? I mean, what happens really?
Well, the destruction of the republic will happen if the political people will not take the steps necessary to downsize the government dramatically. We can't afford $200 billion to $400 billion a year when we're spending $1.3 trillion in excess of receipts. It's just not sustainable. The government will collapse of its own accord unless dramatic reductions take place. All right, well, what will happen? What is the sequence of events? Well, we're going to see something obvious, which is further degradation in the American credit rating. It's not simply going to be a recognition by credit agencies that we have poorer credit. It's going to be a realization by those countries like Japan and China that have lent us money that we're becoming an increasingly grave risk for return on investment. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to use the advantage politically to coerce and cajole us, to put us in a position where we damage the relationships with our friends in order to sustain the money flow coming from these countries, and also put us, in a financial blackmail environment there. But also what's going to happen is that inflationary effects are going to eliminate the economic benefit of any of the benefits the government provides, and also destroy the economy at the same time. There's no way that you can maintain this level of spending and inflation of the money supply and not have it reverberate into the market and cause extreme inflation. So we're going to end up with hyperinflation. We're going to end up with a diminution in the availability of federal benefits because of the fact that those who provide them simply cannot economically afford to provide them.
Is that, Jonathan, why you think there has been a ramp up in activity at FEMA camps, why there's more talk of taking away the rights to protest, requiring a permit to protest? Is there an anticipation of a coming federal collapse that's causing the government right now to clamp down on rights ahead of time?
Well, there is some of that, but there's also a view by politicians which is very grossly irresponsible, and that is that they can, as long as they can maintain the spending spree for a time, they can leave it to somebody else to solve. It's not a situation where any member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, with very few exceptions, is willing to do what is necessary to save the country. As a consequence, we have to commence and maintain a national movement that calls into question the actions that are taken that are unconstitutional, demands that the government be brought back in line with the constitutional requirements, and votes into office those who favor those positions, and demands from them essentially pledges to achieve that end. Ultimately, the typical good American citizen who appreciates the necessity of this will have to run increasingly for office and take back the government. We have to be able to pass through legislation that will break down the government.
But you're fighting against total economic insanity in Washington, and as a great example of that, the Weekly Standard carried a story quoting Valerie Jarrett, who is a senior advisor to the White House. She says that people who receive unemployment checks go out and spend it and help stimulate the economy. So I guess in her mind, and in many of those in Washington, the way to have abundance in America is to make sure that everybody's jobless and spending unemployment checks.
Well, they advocate a nation of dependency, and they also create this deception for the poor that if they rely on these government programs, which incidentally will only take a fraction of them and provide them with anything of economic value, the rest are just given this blank promise which can never be fulfilled. But the notion that we will tax the country and redistribute the wealth to those elements of society that are indigent and not have an adverse effect upon unemployment is ridiculous. And at the same time, create these superficial retraining programs and public works programs, which is a dead-end investment because you have to put that money back in there every single year from the government in order to maintain the programs. And furthermore, they're out of sync with the market. What we want is to liberate the market so that employment levels can increase and that provides a growth in the economic pie instead of having a static pie that we continuously carve apart and remove into the government sector.
But again, Jonathan, you're coming at this from the point of view of being a rational person who wants to help the nation and help the people. And those in charge today who have the political clout and the power, who make the economic decisions, the evidence is increasingly just readily apparent that they want to destroy this nation. I mean, so how, getting to the solution section, how do the citizens, how do the activists, how do the free people of America take part in a real, a peaceful revolution of taking back their power and restoring sanity, economic sanity, among other things, to America?
Well, there has to be a focal point. And what I'm doing is starting a national movement to restore the republic. We have an e-newsletter that's coming out in April that will be a focal point identifying specific instances of government abuse in the bureaucracy, the executive branch, Congress that violate the Constitution, specific means by which to protest those actions, and then also, we're going to demand that elected representatives agree to a platform that will result in a restoration of the republic and a restoration of the Constitution.
Where can people sign up for that e-newsletter? At emord.com?
Yeah, it'll be through emord.com. It'll also be restoretherepublic.co, C-O, okay. And it's under construction right now. But April 1, it'll be available. And we're going to try to create this national movement and push very strongly for the specific purpose of restoring the republic, restoring the constitutional principles and limits on government power, and removing from office those members of Congress and the Senate who are derelict in their responsibilities of upholding their oath of office in the Constitution. So we're moving in that direction. I think that as the crisis continues, as circumstances worsen with the debt, as circumstances worsen and make it apparent to virtually every American that they're not going to get Social Security, they're not going to have, as Pete has promised, Social Security as we know it, it's just not going to exist. It cannot be afforded by this government, and Medicare and Medicaid have to change. The need is to ensure that those who are dependent upon these systems are transitioned into a private environment where companies take on the responsibility of caring and supporting those who are incapable of caring for themselves. And that can be done if the government will give a $1.50 tax deduction for every $1 that a company expends to assist in providing medical care, to assist in providing retirement benefits and so forth for those who are indigent. And there's no reason why this can't happen.
We're back with Jonathan Emord, author of Restore the Republic, a very important new book that lays out a pathway to actually protecting the future of freedom in America. Jonathan Emord joins us by phone to continue that discussion. Jonathan, We were talking about solutions and what people can do right now, what activists can do right now. That's what people are hungry for. They want to be part of a solution. They don't want to see this country just fail and collapse into total destruction. Continue along those lines, please. What can people do right now to be part of the solution?
Well, we're creating this e-newsletter as a focal point to identify each of the specific instances where the administration, the bureaucracy, Congress, the executive branch deviates from the requirements of the Constitution, violates the Constitution, and also on this fiscal irresponsibility, identifying specific measures that threaten to destroy the country, and to advocate reform. And to do so both with the support of politicians, identifying politicians to support who are in favor of the principles that we articulate, which are in favor of the Constitution, and to attack those who are not, and also to demand that specific changes be made to alter the course of this government into a constitutional direction. So it's an ongoing thing. It's a monthly e-newsletter. We're looking to create a movement to restore the Republic. We're using that rubric, Restore the Republic, to identify all those people in this country who are advocates of the Constitution, asking them to come on board and help us in this movement to do this. We're hoping to get large numbers of people behind the movement and to become a critical voice in the evolution of this country. And the book, Restore the Republic, is an ambitious undertaking on my part, but I have identified the means to eliminate the federal government's cost to an extent that would permit a balanced budget by eliminating several federal departments, several federal agencies, by tax deductions given to corporations, enabling them to provide this largesse in lieu of the government. Okay, basically, the whole system is to empower individuals and depower the federal government.
All right, that makes perfect sense. And right now, I'm going to pledge to you some software technology. I founded a software company almost 20 years ago that can handle sending out very large volumes of emails to opt-in subscribers. So I'd like to donate that to your organization and help support your message to bring you subscribers. You'll need good technology to send out email to millions of people, which I'm sure this will grow to.
We can take the Federal Food and Drug Administration and we can eliminate its drug approval process and its medical device approval process by making that a university-based system and having a blinded system of review take place at the universities, which is presumptively a determination of safety and efficacy. We can eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency. There's absolutely no reason why local health and safety can't protect us from environmental pollutants and going after companies that are responsible for trespass or otherwise disturbing the environment. We can eliminate the Department of Commerce. There's no reason why we should have a Department of Commerce, really. Why should the federal government be involved in that? We can eliminate the Department of Education, and very well should, because the Department of Education is a federal system that's destroying education in this country. What we need are more private incentives in education.
Well, right.
Those are just a few.
The big government people like to say, well, how can you be against education? How can you be against the environment? You're not. Actually, the Department of Education is anti-education. The EPA is anti-environment. The FDA is anti-health. I mean, that's the issue.
And the Department of Energy is anti-energy. Yeah, we need to get rid of the Department of Energy as well. But there are many listed in the book precisely how it can be done and the cost savings that come from eliminating them.
All right, stay with us if you would. We'll go into a quick break. We'll be right back with more with Jonathan Emord, author of Restore the Republic. Please stay with us, Jonathan. I've got a quote from Gandhi here that I wanted to bring in because it reminds me of the kind of ethics and courage that Jonathan Emord brings to every issue. Gandhi says, quote, "Many people, especially ignorant people, want to punish you for speaking the truth, for being correct, for being you. Never apologize for being correct or for being years ahead of your time. If you're right and you know it, speak your mind. Even if you are a minority of one, the truth is still the truth." That's of course, a quote from Gandhi. Jonathan, thanks for staying with us for this additional 5 minutes. What else can you tell us about what we need to do right now to restore the Republic?
Well, the good news is that liberty is the inevitable condition of mankind. Despite the fact that governments our own now and governments historically have endeavored to take away individual liberty and to deprive people of freedom of choice, that has invariably failed. And the sad lesson that this government is going to learn is that you may not enslave the entire American population without the consequence that a country dependent upon their earnings to survive, a parasitic government that depends upon those earnings to operate its machinery, will collapse of its own weight if it deprives people of the freedom necessary to make a living. And that's where we're at. We're at this point where there's a good percentage of the American population upset with the government and demanding constitutional reform back to the original Constitution, precisely because the government has so arrogantly exceeded its authority that it now threatens the existence of a market upon which we all depend to live. And I think we're going to get there. I just hope that we get there through the reforms that we're talking about, through this Restore the Republic movement, rather than getting there as a result of the collapse of the government and the calamity that it will cause to the economy and the disruption and injury that will be caused to so many people as a result of that derelict course.
Well, let me ask you about the Commerce Clause. I'm sure this is one of the key points of your platform, the Restore the Republic platform. Are you going to go after the Commerce Clause and the overreaching misinterpretation of that clause by the federal government, which it uses, as you well know, to go after things like raw milk freedom?
Right. The Commerce Clause was never intended to give government a free check in order to go into every single private domain and regulate it. But that's how the Congress of the United States is interpreted. The Commerce Clause was intended to prevent states from imposing barriers to free enterprise that would destroy the value of contract and disable the free enterprise system. That's why the Commerce Clause was created. It was created specifically to deal with the crisis that then existed, in which some of the nation states were imposing tariff barriers to prevent outside industry from getting into the states. It was never intended to give the federal government a power to take over all the operation of the states in order to pursue some federal objective. It is the ultimate in the deprivation of individual liberty and property. And we have to restore individual sovereignty in order for this nation to be great again.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and your effort, your courage as an American. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike.